Picture this. You're cruising down a winding highway, the roar of a beastly engine filling the air. You glance at the rearview mirror and see the silhouette of a legend, Shelby, Lee Iacocca. Names that echo through the halls of automotive history. But there's one Mustang that demands respect in a way no other car does. A name that's not just remembered, but revered. Enter the Boss 351, a forgotten hero from the golden age of muscle cars. Built at the tail end of an era, it was a powerhouse crafted for a war that never came. What happens when a muscle car is built for greatness, only to see the world change before it could leave its mark? This is the story of the 1971 Mustang Boss 351, a car that should have been a king, but instead became a legendary underdog. Let's take a closer look at what made this machine the unsung hero of the Mustang family. The year is 1971. The 1960s, with its wild times of free love, cheap gas, and the brutal horsepower wars, were coming to an end. The automotive world was standing at a crossroads, forced to face the reality of tougher emissions laws, skyrocketing insurance premiums, and shifting consumer tastes. The car culture that defined America was about to change forever. And then, there was the Ford Mustang. When the Mustang first hit the streets in 1964, it was revolutionary. A small, lightweight car that blended sporty performance with everyday usability. A car that could put the thrill of a race car in the hands of the average American. Fast forward to 1971, and the Mustang was a completely different beast. Ford had been listening to the American consumer. They wanted more luxury, more space, and more comfort. So, Ford made the decision to redesign the Mustang for 1971, giving it a bulkier frame, bigger body lines, and a more aggressive stance. It was no longer the nimble, lightweight pony it used to be. The 1971 Mustang grew by 8 inches in length and 6 inches in width compared to the original model. It got heavier, it got wider, and it started to feel more like a muscle-bound boxer than the lithe athlete it once was. The new design was controversial. People either loved it or hated it. Even Lee Iacocca, the father of the Mustang, took one look at the expanded body and famously called it a fat pig. But there was a bigger picture behind all this. Ford wasn't just making the Mustang bigger for the sake of style. No, they were preparing it for the big block 429 engine. The Mustang wasn't just going to be a pony anymore, it was going to be a full-fledged muscle car. The world, however, was beginning to care more about fuel efficiency than raw horsepower. The muscle car era was on the decline, and just as Ford made these major changes, the winds of time were turning against them. In the midst of this redesign, Ford engineers were given an enormous task: keep the Boss legacy alive. The Boss 302 and Boss 429 were legendary, but now they needed to build a car that could handle the weight and the power, and still perform like a race car. Ford needed a miracle. Enter the Boss 351. The Boss 351 was initially designed with one goal in mind: SECA Trans Am homologation. Ford's plan was to take this larger Mustang and use it to dominate the 1971 racing season, taking down the Chevrolet Camaro and showing who truly ruled the muscle car kingdom. The Boss 351 was engineered to be a street-legal version of the race car that was supposed to be the weapon Ford unleashed on the track. But, in a move that shocked the automotive world, Ford pulled out of all factory-backed motorsports in 1971. Safety concerns from advocacy groups had grown too strong, and the pressure to stop promoting "win on Sunday, sell on Monday" became overwhelming. Just like that, Ford's racing program was axed. The Boss 351, however, was already well into production. Millions of dollars had been invested in R&D, and Ford wasn't about to scrap it. So they released the Boss 351 as a street car, a muscle car with no competition and no series to dominate. It was a street brawler with no real home in the racing world. Now, let's talk about what made the Boss 351 so incredible. Under the hood was the legendary 351 Cleveland V8 engine, a masterpiece of engineering that still has Ford enthusiasts buzzing today. This wasn't some simple truck engine dropped into a Mustang. No, this was high-performance precision. Ford used forged connecting rods and aluminum pistons, components typically reserved for exotic sports cars. The cylinder heads were massive, designed with large caned valves to let air flow through the engine like a fire hose, giving it the fuel it needed to perform at its best. Ford didn't just slap any carburetor on this beast, either. They custom-built a carburetor specifically for the Boss 351, the Autolite Model 4300D, a 750 CFM unit that delivered fuel perfectly across the entire rev range. Paired with a mechanical solid lifter camshaft and a high compression ratio of 11.7 to 1, this engine was a ticking time bomb of performance. On paper, the engine made 330 horsepower and 370 lb-ft of torque. But the Boss 351 was about more than just raw horsepower numbers. It was about balance. Ford paired this V8 with a 4-speed manual transmission, which was mandatory for the Boss 351. It wasn't an easy ride. This top loader required muscle to shift, making it a true driver's car. Add to that a 3.91:1 limited slip traction lock rear end, and you have a car that could launch violently off the line. 0 to 60 miles per hour was a blistering 6.3 seconds, and the quarter-mile time came in the high 13-second range. For 1971, that was supercar territory. It wasn't just the engine that made the Boss 351 special. It was how it handled, too. The suspension was derived directly from the lessons Ford had learned with the Boss 302, including stiffer springs, heavy-duty shocks, and staggered rear shocks to prevent wheel hop during hard launches. Ford installed sway bars front and rear, keeping that big, wide body flat through corners, and ensured the car stayed planted even under the most aggressive driving. Braking was handled by power disc brakes up front, with drums in the rear. And when car and driver tested the Boss 351, they were blown away. They praised its engine flexibility and chassis composure, describing it as one of the most aggressive muscle cars that could still handle corners with precision. However, no car is perfect. The 1971 Mustang Boss 351 wasn't without its flaws. The first issue was the interior. For a car that was supposed to represent a step up in luxury, the cockpit was surprisingly bland. It didn't have the style or the flair of earlier Mustangs. The seats felt basic, the dash didn't impress, and overall, the interior was forgettable. But the real problem? Visibility. The rear roofline of the 1971 fastback design created a massive blind spot. Looking through the rearview mirror felt like peeking through a tiny mail slot, and changing lanes was nothing short of a leap of faith. Even reversing was an adventure. The Mustang's design had sacrificed rear visibility in favor of aggressive styling, and it was evident when you got behind the wheel. Despite these quirks, the Boss 351 remains one of the most coveted Mustangs on the market today. If you want one in good condition, be prepared to spend around $64,000. But for a low-mileage, concourse-quality survivor, the price tag climbs well into the six figures. The 1971 Boss 351 proves that bigger doesn't always mean better. Despite its bulk, it could dance like a ballerina and hit like a heavyweight champion. It was the forgotten boss, the last true warrior of the golden age of muscle cars, and arguably one of the best Mustangs Ford ever built. Now, we want to hear from you. Would you pick the Boss 351 over the legendary Boss 302? Or does the classic 302 hold a special place in your heart? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome content. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.